So, in that gospel of success, who wrote those books, those rags to riches stories? Well, what was the pen name for the rags to riches stories? Yeah, Horatio Alger. But basically promoting what's the philosophy for no competition, no hands-off competition? Laissez-faire. Even though to them, laissez-faire meant help big business, don't mess with how we spend it. And so we got to that, and then we got to the question of how old the earth is, right? And we all settled on about 6,500 years old, correct? And then those darned canals and fossils started showing up. So I think that's why we quit, right? We're talking about fossils and canals and. Did I mention the volcano? Did I show you what this was? So Mount Vesuvius is just south of Naples. That picture was taken in 43. Still rumbles, still smokes. It yeah, there's still a couple of volcanoes that are very active in Italy. A lot. One that's erupts all the time in Sicily. All the time. But and so there's Vesuvius. And so they have granite. So this is granite. There are granite smoke vents, like this little thing right here, all over. And they found something when they really started looking at it. They found something amazing underneath this granite volcano that has to be incredibly old. And I told you about them counting the layers of peat and realizing, wow, the world must be really old, like 1,000,000 years. And then they discovered this. Under the granite fissures of Mount Vesuvius. This is under Mount Vesuvius. So it's layers below Mount Vesuvius. You see what those are? Clamshells. That meant that Mount Vesuvius was on something that used to be an ocean. If it was on something that used to be an ocean, how many years did that take? And this is blowing their minds. So we're talking 1820s, 1830s. They're just going, the world is incredibly new. And it's clearly looking like there were species that used to exist 1,000,000 years ago that don't exist anymore. And why are there so many different varieties of species? It shaped their faith in their religion, their faith, but also what they thought they knew about science. This is at the era where biological science was just beginning. In fact, they didn't have a name for it. They were just dividing animals into genus and species going into the early 1800s. So this is all brand new. And they're looking at this as how old the world is. And then why are there some species of animals that are very similar in one area? They're very similar, but something that's different. A different animal in a different part of the world. Especially on these isolated islands like Piquaco. So we just throw one out. Telling you that. But also, if you know anything about birds, you know how many warblers there are? There's over 500 different species of warblers. The little tiny fly-catching birds. Think of little birds. Here, if you ever see a warbler like a yellow warbler or yellow rump, that's what we have here. Just little tiny birds. All over. Why are there so many? Well, as many people begin to look at this and realize the differences. A philosophy was already developing by the 1840s. And now there's a competition to get more evidence to prove the hypothesis that if the world is this old, that means that animals have adapted to the changing world, and therefore some species survived and some didn't. In the competition of this happening, there was a winner. 3 scientists were on their way in the 1850s to write their treatise on this. A man by the name of Charles Darwin was going to write a multi-volume set. Part of what he did back when he was on a Royal Navy observation ship called the Beagle, leading to the Galapagos. And he took his multi-volume set of books and put it together in a summary called On the Origin of Species. And he knew how controversial this would be, so he avoided humans in this first book. He avoided them. And in it, There's Darwin. That's not the most famous picture of Darwin. That's Darwin in the 1850s. That's actually right after he wrote the book. And he's going to become internationally known, and he still is known today. And you know how controversial it was? In a way, he liked it, in a way, he hated it. But his theory was called natural selection. Now, he did not invent the theory. There were others coming up with it. He got out there first. There were others on the same path. And basically, different species and subspecies have traits to adapt to the changing environment. Those who can make the adaptation survive, and those who cannot die off. And it has nothing to do with the most powerful animal, or for that matter, the smartest. It's those who can adapt. Those who can adapt. What species can adapt? Now, almost immediately, people look at it and said, even though he voted humans, if he's saying this about every other animal, does he mean humans come from this? That means adaptations that survived were passed on to humans. And what does that mean? Well, this is a term that goes back to ancient Greeks on a similar vein, but this is more philosophical. Basically, people in what is now modern Eastern, Western Turkey, pondering this, came up with a term you've all heard of, evolution. And that's what people, like, idea that people were evolving, species were evolving, changing. Now, that's not quite what natural selection is. But you get that idea that people evolve and change, or species change. I should add that Darwin would have written The Descent of Man, the Descent of Man 12 years later, and where he would involve humans. I'm talking about humans being in natural species, or natural selection too. Now, evolution implies, though, that species are changing into something else. And you notice I go from bottom to top. I do that on purpose. I do that on purpose. Because almost immediately people read that and said, you mean monkeys are evolving into humans? Now, once again, I say that my guess is to most of you, that's ridiculous. But not to everybody, and especially then, because this is going to lead to something. Now, it does not mean natural selection that a species, and I use this term on purpose, a lower species is changing into a superior or higher species. It's that species adapt and change to the environment. And sometimes this adaptation will lead to a new species. It's not that monkeys are evolving into humans. It's that all primates, for example, have common ancestry. Here is the primate tree, primate hands, thumb. And so from common ancestry, brought off to everything from here, the bush baby, up here, we have baboon, long-eared monkey, what's a capuchin monkey, which are kind of crazy looking monkeys. They have a very human looking face, spider monkeys, or orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, humans. Have common ancestry. Now, I repeat, it's not that chimpanzees or gorillas are evolving into humans. It's common ancestry, and then natural selection, some traits survive, and sometimes eventually lead to new species. By the way, that picture on the left, that would become the more famous look at Darwin. My guess is those of you who've seen Darwin, that's probably the face you've seen. That's what I think of Darwin. He let the beard go, especially when we got famous and more controversial. In a way, he kind of liked being controversial, and the way he hated it. But Darwin, this set shock waves like you can't imagine. Biological science was created by Charles Darwin. It was already starting, but it would really get its roots, its scientific holding once they had the idea of natural selection. Then they could really have biology. It was hard to come up with the theories until Darwin. And I should add one more thing. There are going to be some holes in this past evolution of species because we relied on fossils. And let's be clear about one thing. Fossils are absolutely remarkable. It's remarkable that they found any. It's remarkable that this happened. But then we have fossils at home. So of course there's going to be holes. It's remarkable that there are fossils and how many there are. So I got to repeat, it's remarkable. But in a book that was written in the 1960s about natural selection, and more they're using evolution, Partially because also people are being hungry, things they do that upset people. But there's a book called The March of Progress. And in The March of Progress, they have that picture right there. Now, this is 1960s. Now, I'm telling you this because this is already a common idea before, but this is going to become one of the most famous images in world history. All of you have seen this. Something like this, right? Every one of you have seen this. I can't imagine you haven't. Now, it doesn't say that in the book. It doesn't say it in the text. But it implies, if you just look at this picture, and it's a very striking picture, isn't it? So you have, chimpanzees, eventually human, Homo sapiens sapiens. Sapiens sapiens. It's implying it's evolving. That evolved into this, evolved into this, evolved into this, evolved into this. No, they all have common ancestry. But it's implying lower, higher, inferior, superior. And then you start seeing pictures like this. And I got this, this is new, of human evolution. And you have human, I love the pose there. But I guess that's the modern pose. Once you're fully evolved. But look what doesn't it imply it's evolving from what? Yeah. So we have this amoeba. And someday that plucky amoeba, if they keep working hard, that amoeba will become a human being sometime. And cells evolved into fish and then lizards and then rat, or I guess that's a cat, I don't know. Eventually up to humans, which is not at all what natural selection is. But this is important because once you have this idea that you have lower and higher, you get a hierarchy of species. Here's another one that came at the turn of the last century. Humans from cells. And that's where you start getting lots of pictures attacking or mocking Darwin, as Darwin, you see, as a monkey's body. And the whole thing about the attack against this, especially people who this really shook their faith, the religious faith, would be, I didn't evolve from some monkey. I'm special. Thus, Darwin, monkey's body. Because once you decide that you can have a hierarchy of species, lower, higher, inferior, superior, human, superior. Could you have a hierarchy within the species of different subspecies? Or for that matter, maybe different colors of skin, that sort of thing. Because once you have hierarchy of humans, you have the hierarchy of class. That's why rich people are on top. By natural selection, they've made this hierarchy by color of skin and sex, male or female. Now, this should remind you of philosophies that we've already had, especially the positive good theory. But now we have science behind it, because it's implying that Darwin's natural selection led to this. Darwin is saying that if species compete in a difficult environment, it's implying, and they would say, it argues that that's what humans do. We all compete against other humans. And those who are superior rise to the top. And those who are inferior on the bottom. Sometimes it could be by wealth, color of skin. There's a reason, and it's natural. Much like the positive good theory, but now we have science. And not just any science, it's revolution in science. It wasn't just a few people saying this to try to justify slavery. Now we have science. Yes. But do you think Darwin liked this? He hated this so much. He despised this. He was so jealous. He believed that there should be equality between the races, sexes, and classes. That was Darwin. He was radically opposed to this. And he hated the fact that his name's going to be put on. I can't even begin to tell you how much Darwin hated it. Darwin basically made the point of, okay, in society, environments, we have species adopted to environments. Humans can make decisions. We can decide how we treat them. We can make that decision. We can treat people, we could have inequalities or not have inequalities. That's what Darwin believed. So, there's another, okay. Awesome. The Evolution of the Stick Man, I thought was pretty darn good. Here's a couple other ones. These have been used so much. Okay, this is an older one, but I like going down to the computer. There's mini sports. A good friend of mine was a very good hockey player. He's retired now. He had a t-shirt with that on. Yeah, get it. You want to see two more cartoons of evolution? The great cartoon for the 80s called The Far Side. Here are two. I thought this one's awesome. Okay, first one, the dinosaurs laughing at a little mammal. Okay, I like it, I don't care. And then taking the same from cells, the Jorgensens, Hilda and Ned, as cells, eventually to me and sister. Okay. It's pretty sophisticated humor. All right. Where does this lead to? Okay, this is not a class, even though scientific development goes hand in hand as we talked about innovation with history, it comes to social Darwinism. And social Darwinism, remember I showed you those pictures back in the 1850s to justify slavery? Well, this is 1890s. And now it's saying that there are different biological differences between the races. And we have chimpanzees, and then you can see different colors of skin, and then the Caucasian. And by the way, you can tell by the way they dress, the way they look. I mean, you know what they're trying to imply there. This is definitely, they're trying to imply something by color of skin. So remember, racism got its start out of slavery, Bacon's Rebellion, to justify slavery, positive and good theory. And then we have this. So there's a man by the name of, oh, I made a mistake on your test. It didn't change anything, but I put down that he was American. He was an English. Herbert Spencer. I don't know why I put down American. Are you mad at me now? Did that mess everything up? Even if you got it right, is that why you missed another one because you were so distraught over that? Is that why I didn't get my bonus because I was still distraught over that? I'm sorry. Do you forgive me? Probably not. Herbert Spencer, an Englishman, wealthy, aristocrat. And he came up with the idea of, well, natural selection. We can relate that to class, can't we? Can't that fit in with class? And what Spencer was thinking was this. Let me change something on this. Spencer was a wealthy Englishman. He was from an aristocratic family, lived on a country estate, and he was looking at society. And he looked at like, oh yeah, naturally, I'm better. Look at my parents and I have a country estate. But he's heard about and ridden through a couple of times the new industrial cities of Britain, like Manchester, Birmingham, brimming with factories, but also tenements and horrible living conditions for the people who live there. And he's asking why? Why are there class differences? And he came up with natural selection. Give me one sec. How does it do that? Give me a second. Okay, so back to Spencer. And so he said, why are some people on top? And I'm not kidding about this. Maybe on a carriage you rode through and saw. Look at the horrible, awful living conditions that people have to live with without sewage. They're basically their sewage would be a slough, just a lawyer. They just would dump everything. No garbage collection. Why are the poor living like this? Why? And why do I have such a good life? And why did you manufacture to get me super rich? Why? And he came in with one assumption before he really started thinking about this. I'm on top. I mean, I'm better, obviously. But why? Why am I superior to these people who live in colonies? Why? Natural selection. He saw Darwin though. That's Eureka. Just like some species adapt to changing environments, some humans can better adapt to the changing environment of civilization, aka the market. And those who are superior rise to the top because they're better. They're morally, physically, mentally above everybody else. They are better. They are tougher, smarter, stronger, and that's where you come up with the term survival of the fittest. Now, most people think this is from Darwin. Darwin despised this term because clearly that's not what happened with natural selection. The strongest creatures did not survive necessarily. Just look at the dinosaurs. But he's saying wealthy people, upper class, are stronger in all ways. So it is natural. Class is natural. Somebody has to be on top. There's always somebody on top. That is natural. And that should harken right back to the positive good theory. Before Spencer ever wrote, you have Calhoun writing, "We're civilizing the slaves." And there's always been somebody on top. And this is natural. So it fits in right, very naturally, but it sounds scientific. It's science. And if you don't know much or want to believe this, now you got your argument. And then what about poor people? Why are they poor? They're morally corrupt. There's something wrong with them. They're morally corrupt. They're not smart enough. They're not intelligent enough. They don't have a work ethic. They don't have that grit or whatever it might be. You can come up with any term like today. They're just not smart enough. Remember the positive good theory where it said if the slaves are freed, they'll turn to vice and crime? It's the same argument. The poor just don't work hard enough. They're not clean. That's why they live in hovels. That's why they live in poverty, because they're naturally impoverished. It's not because they're relying on a system that they must work for a capitalist who, if they're not selling their goods, they fire them. Or the wage system. No, it's because they're lazy. And if you help them, you're actually hurting. Because they're not supposed to. And I got to be honest, Spencer hit the United States in the early 1870s like a storm. Like, wow, blew in, especially for what kind of people? The new Rockefellers. Because it was justifying what they were doing. It was natural for us to do whatever we could to get rich. It was natural. We're supposed to do it. In fact, Spencer would say, corrupt business practices, the fraud, the working conditions, the very dangerous working conditions, or for that matter, cheating people, or overcharging rent and cheating people about renting homes, no sewage, all that. That's natural. They're supposed to do that. In fact, some of the wealthiest people in the United States brought Spencer over to the United States, met him at New York, Harvard, met him on the boat. That like he was like their philosopher saying, "You're justifying everything we're doing. We can continue to get rich as possible, and we don't have to feel guilty about the way we treat our workers. We don't have to feel guilty about the way the poor live, the vast majority of people, because it's natural. We can feel good about it." In fact, they took him to Fifth Avenue, which is becoming one of the wealthiest parts of New York City. You go near Central Park, Fifth Avenue is right there. There's all these mansions. It's kind of remarkable, Fifth Avenue, because just a few blocks away is a place called Five Points. And the 5 Points were basically 5 little creeks ran into one kind of a slough, sort of water, so it was a swampy, used to have malarial infested area. Well, that's the cheapest real estate, so the poorest people in New York. Just hovels, no sewage, no garbage collection, just awful conditions. And they took Spencer there and showed the way people live and say, look at the way they live. You're exactly right. How morally corrupt they are. And they were overjoyed. See, you're right. I don't feel bad about this. Now, let me tell you what Spencer did. Spencer looked at this and said, "Oh, live like this? That's not what I meant. I was just trying to explain how some classes are wrong. I didn't think you should treat people like this." How did they react to Spencer? People like Carnegie and J. Rule, some of the richest people in America, they sent him back to newspapers. No, we don't want to feel guilty. We want to keep doing what we're doing. And so Spencer would kind of disappear because he looked at this as basically philosophical. And then when he saw the reality, he was appalled. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking. How could he not go to a place like Manchester where this was happening in England? He just never went. Just didn't do it.
Didn't have to. Why? Because he said. And then when he actually saw it, it blew him away. So, don't write this down. Here's a quote from Adam Smith. I'm going to go and read the Adam Smith quote, please. This is 1781. This is after he wrote The Wealth of Nations. Remember I told you about sharecroppers living in absolute poverty, and then they turned around and said, see, look what happens when you give them freedom. Remember I told you about the Dawes Act, what a disaster it was on the reservations? Then they turned around and said, look, that's what happens when you give the tribes their freedom. And so non-tribal members should take their land. This is going to happen time after time. And this is a big deal. If you know anything about this, today, wealthy get away with a lot. Eventually there is a point where people have had enough, and it's happened many times in history. Do you know when yeah. What he's saying that it's natural. No, not if. They won't. People on the bottom are inferior. So they'll never work hard. But the people on top are superior. They always work hard. They always work hard. So we should ignore what they do because they're supposed to be. So it's not that some people, it's not this idea that people are going to work hard and someday they can get to the top. No, the people on top are supposed to stay on top. And so now, I'm going to be honest with you. Social Darwinism is the dominant philosophy in the world today. So there are people who believe that people on top are supposed to be on top. It's natural, especially people who are on top. Now, if I'm going to tell you it's true or not, this is not science. But there are many people who believe that that's what philosophy is. And all right, I got to move on. I looked at the clock. William Graham Sumner had no problem with this. William Graham Sumner, he was an American, and he had no problem. I think when I was writing the quiz, I had Sumner in my head. American. I'm moving on. Sumner, for 25 years, would become the patron saint of social Darwinism because he had no qualms and knew his audience. They wanted to hear that they didn't have to worry about the poor, and that anytime they give aid to the poor, it's actually hurting them. So he wrote natural selection is equal to the marketplace, the cutthroat world of capitalism. And therefore the strong, they're superior, and what makes them strong? Wealth and power. His most famous book would be Folkways in 1906. And wow, that is a read. I've never read the whole thing. I had to read excerpts in class. And it is class and race-based like you cannot believe. Natural selection. So the cutthroat world of capitalism is just like the natural world of fighting for food. And he looked at it as just as you have predators, just as you have a pack of lions taking down a gazelle, you have the wealthy taking out. It's the same. Which also I should add, wealthy like that. Yeah. And weak. Or gazelle. So social hierarchies are natural. They exist, they're natural, and we shouldn't fight it. They're supposed to be this way. Some people are on top, some people are on bottom. Now the point is, I'm glad Drew asked this, it's that they believe it's natural. It's not that, oh yeah, in society there are social hierarchies, but people can move and adapt by how hard they work. No, it's I'm supposed to be on top. By the way, remember I kept telling you how they want to take over politics to make sure the rules kind of keep them on top? They would say that's natural. So, does that work for race then? Lighter colored skin, they must be superior. Especially when they started conquering and exploiting the rest of the world, they could say, we're civilizing inferior races. We're civilizing. And you see the same thing obviously with class, but also sexual. Women, hey, it's natural. The cult of domesticity, remember that? It's natural. It's supposed to be that way. Women are on the bottom. So remember Bacon's Rebellion when I told you when they made the changes, and especially for poor people who are white, they said you didn't have much. Well, what's the one thing you have? Color of your skin. And I think it's tell that to men too. Oh, sure, you might be bottom economically, but what's the one thing you do have? That life, your security. Someone on top might be telling you what to do. In fact, the term they would use is you can have someone, you can have your food. So I might not have much, but at least I have somebody to order around. This is a big deal. So when Russia tried to ban, this is 20 years ago when they still kind of had a democratic, and had a little bit of a democracy, they tried to ban rape and marriage and beating your wife. Try to make that illegal. It wasn't perfectly legal. So, and people went nuts. In fact, this would become one of Vladimir Putin's big issues. I would allow him to become elected president and I was dictating. By telling men, you're losing money. Russia, most people are incredibly poor. So, you don't have much, but you continue to beat your wife. And I'm not joking about that. That is very serious. It was used as politics, quite effective. I should add, did anyone see what they're estimating the number of Russians are dying every month in the Ukraine war? 35,000 Russians are dying every month. That's the 60,000 Americans that have been in the war. 35,000, probably about 50,000 Ukrainians. They're still doing it. Speaking of that, here we go. The last thing that's really important: the role of government. The role of government. This is why this is so important. Governments make the rules. The rules they made back in 1890 still affect us today. They affect how you live. This is really what history is. Oh, sure, we got no dates and facts, and it doesn't make any sense unless you know date and fact. But you've got to know the things that happened in the past and how they affect you and why, and to know that this is not natural. So, government intervention is futile. Any aid to the working poor actually hurts them because they're supposed to be on the bottom, and if you help them, they'll get working. Or the big one they'll use, they'll drink it away. Remember how they said that the slaves would turn to vice? They'll drink it away, they'll turn to crime, they'll loaf, they don't know how to work. That's why they're poor. So it will be a disaster. Any aid by the government, will reinforce the negative traits. Aid to working people, let's say things like, unemployment insurance, they lose their job. Aid for college. They would argue public education. Aid for healthcare, old age pension. You're making poor people lazy. They'll just eat it or drink it away. So the massive cuts they're going to have in healthcare over the next couple of years, this was the arguments that were used this summer to pass this bill to take about 21 million Americans off of healthcare. Why? They're just using that healthcare to get healthy. They should be earning that. And government aid must go to the successful. Thus, laissez-faire. If you want the country to prosper, you give aid to the wealthy. You give aid to the rich. They know what to do with it. Therefore, laissez-faire. That's why this is important. It goes from philosophy to direct effects on our life to this day. Yeah, this social Darwinism is huge. It's the dominant philosophy, but most people don't like the term. It's really uncomfortable. In the 1920s, a couple of groups started in Europe that were solely based upon social Darwinism. One in Italy, they called themselves the fascists. Have you heard of them? And then there's this group called the National Socialists. We hated socialism, but National Socialists. But they were derisively called the Nazis. Yeah, they're all social Darwinism. 100% social Darwinism. Yeah, Nazis actually was a term to attack. Hey, they're back in vogue. A lot of neo-Nazis. Isn't that fun? Remember, we used to hate Nazis, but now, wow. You see. Goodbye, everybody. Drew, good question. And good luck.